This is Corey from World Music Nashville, and you are listening to The Business Side of Music.
Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to The Business Side of Music.
Hi, this is Bob Bender, and you're listening to this edition of The Business Side of Music. Today we have in the studio here in Nashville, Tennessee, a dear friend of mine and fellow producer, Rick Lloyd. Rick's been working in the music business for around 4 decades now. In that time, he's worked in the studio producing and playing guitar for some of these artists, including Billie Jo Spears, T. Graham Brown, Loretta Lynn, Stella Parton, Eddie Rabbitt, Tony Orlando, Boxcar Willie, Billy Walker, The Letterman, Janie Fricke, Tommy Cash, Marty Stewart, Crystal Gayle, and George Jones, just to name a few. Hey, Rick, thanks for joining us here in the studio. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Bob, thanks for having me here. It's great to see you again, and glad to be here with you on the show.
Well, it's great to have you here in the studio. Why don't you give us a little bit of history, how you got started in the business?
Well, I actually got my start back in high school. I was working with a gospel group at the time called the Coffee Family back in East Tennessee, and they were on Heartwarming Records at the time, which was a pretty big deal. And
if memory serves me correctly, didn't they play at the Grand Ole Opry, or at least on the Opry stage?
We actually got to work on the Grand Ole Opry once a month on Sundays. They used to have the Grand Ole Gospel Opry on Sunday, starting at the Ryman Auditorium, and then, of course, in '74, moved out to the home of the Grand Ole Opry, where it's at today, and where it used to be Opryland, USA.
Yeah, where Opry Mills is located now, just right down the road from our studio here.
And so I got my start back then, really, at the age of 13, and then at the age of 17, I knew the band leader with George Jones. He was actually from my hometown. We didn't meet while I was in my hometown, but that's when we met, and in the latter years, when I was about 16. And so he invited me to move here in '76. So I graduated high school literally one day and moved here the next day. And that's been 41 years ago. And
wow, what a thrill to do something at that young of an age. And you're still here.
Here I am, still here.
You spent some years on the road back in the day with a few country artists, most notably Billie Jo Spears, from what I remember in our conversations. How was it like on the road back then?
Yeah, I did. I spent a lot of time with Billie Jo Spears. I spent actually 5 years with her, and it was a great time. She was one of the greatest ladies ever to work with, a very kind lady, and she was just huge, of course, in Europe, and her biggest hit here, of course, was Blanket on the Ground.
I think that was a #1 Billboard hit for her, too. When was that?
And that was in the late 70s and early 80s. I actually went to work with her in 1980. And so it was a great time. She was just a great lady to work with. Life on the road was good back then. Probably not too much different than it is now. Of course, they're making more money now than we did at that point. But it was really good. We had a great band. Everybody got along together, and she treated everybody just like royalty. So it was actually great.
Part of your travels with Billie Jo were spent over in Europe. Did you find any difference in the fans and the audience over there than you do here in the States?
Yeah, we spent a lot of time in Europe, especially Great Britain, England, Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and all of that. And the fans are different over there. They're a little bit more conservative, a little bit more laid back, and so but I really enjoyed them. They were very quiet during the performance because, out of respect for that artist, they listened to the music. There was not a lot of jumping up and down and hollering and dancing and things like that.
What type of venues did you perform in over there?
we worked theaters over there. There were really intimate theaters that seated about 2,000, and of course her shows were always sold out there, and she was just great with the audiences. She understood that audience, and they absolutely adored her, and they loved her. She was just a mega star at that time, and those fans, they were reserved, and they waited till the end of the song, and they gave their applause. Of course, they would whistle and give a really, really nice applause, but when that next song started, they quietened right down, and so it's a lot different than the fans are here in the United States. And then, of course, at the end of the show, she always got an encore, so she had to come back out and do a curtain call, as we called it back then. And it was really, really good, and she always got standing ovations there in Europe, and so.
But the fans were great, though.
But yeah, the fans were very, very cordial over there, and they were great, and they respected even the band members that played. We were just part of the show, and they really respected all of us at that time.
Jumping forward a few years, when you and I had first met, you had recently completed Jeff Fenholt's Christmas project that he had recorded for Trinity Broadcasting Network. How was it to work with Jeff? I mean, let's face it, the guy had some very interesting history, having performed with Black Sabbath along with being cast in the Broadway production of Jesus Christ Superstar. Now all of a sudden he's recording a very traditional Christmas album that includes, if my memory serves me correctly, full orchestration.
Yeah, I worked for Trinity Broadcasting Network for several years, and as a matter of fact, Paul Crouch hired me to build the recording facility that they have here in the Nashville area, out in Hendersonville, Tennessee. And so it's a great studio. It's a state-of-the-art facility, and I was very privileged to be the kind of the architect, if you will, behind that, and I managed the studio and produced their projects for them for several years, and that was a real joy. And of course, the very first project that I was asked to do for them was for Jeff Fenholt, as you already said, was the lead singer for Black Sabbath, and he was the very first Jesus Christ Superstar on Broadway, and so he was great to work with. He's still a great friend. We talk on the phone quite a lot still, and we stay in touch. But we were fortunate enough that that project sold 1.3 million CD albums.
Wow!
In about six or 7 weeks, and so it just took off like a blaze. It was just a wonderful time, and
sounds like it.
And so Paul was very proud of that. We were all very proud of it. And as you said, we got to do full orchestration. We got to do with overdubs and everything. We got to do about a 60-piece orchestra that was all arranged and conducted by a piano player that I use a lot named Jason Webb here in Nashville, one of the greatest that there is. And so that project really turned out great. It really opened a lot of doors for me and for Jeff and for TBN. So it was a great time and a great project. If you get a chance, I think it's probably still available online. It's called Jeff Fenholt Does the Christmas Classics.
Well, I can tell you I have a copy of it, and I absolutely love it. It's something that we've played several Christmases here in our house. From my understanding, that album did extremely well for TBN. You mentioned the numbers. Tell us a little bit about the numbers you achieved and the power of the network behind those sales.
Yeah, the album project did just extremely well. 1.3 million CDs in 6 or 7 weeks, from November the 1st till about December the 21st. Since it was a Christmas album project, they only ran it for that 7 weeks. But it's still available, and it sold more even the next year. Although they didn't run it on TV, but that was the power of the television network at the point. TBN was the number one Christian broadcasting network. It's the oldest Christian broadcast network in the world. It's the original. the audience there just loves Jeff. They still love him. He still can go on there and perform, and people there still love what he does. And so all they had to do is start running the ads for that a couple of times a day, and the calls started coming in for that album project, and it was a really, really good project.
We're going to take a short break here, and then when we come back, I want to ask Rick about his record label that he started. It included some amazing artists that he had on the roster. This is Bob Bender, and you're listening to this edition of The Business Side of Music.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
Hi, this is Vinny Rebus, the founder of Indie Connect. Our goal is to ensure that you have the knowledge, the tools, skills, resources, and connections that you need to develop a profitable and long-lasting career in music. One way we do this is through these Business Side of Music podcasts. I'd also like to invite you to check out Indie Connect magazine, our free multimedia online publication packed with practical interviews and advice from music industry experts. Go to www.indieconnectmag. That's www.indieconnectmag.com. Let us walk with you and guide you every step of your musical journey.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
This is Bob Bender, and you're listening to this edition of The Business Side of Music. Got in the studio today, fellow producer, dear friend of mine, Rick Lloyd. You know, before we took the break, I mentioned that some years later, you went on to establish a record label that actually really included some amazing artists on the roster. Unfortunately, it also seemed to come at a time when the record business was changing dramatically, almost overnight. And it caught almost everyone off guard. With the record business as it is now versus then, is there anything you would have done different then that you can see now?
Yeah, we were fortunate enough to establish our own label at the time, and we had some great artists on the roster, like you said. We had Tommy Cash, who is the brother of Johnny Cash. We had T. Graham Brown, who is just Mr. Voice to me. His voice is just so unique and so great. Others sing kind of like him, but he's a little bit more unique, I think, with his background, and he's got a lot of soul and a lot of the blues stuff behind his voice, and it's really, really great, along with several other great artists that we had on the label. And so and you're right, the business it came at a time where the business was changing almost every day, and still today the business is changing so much. And there was a lot of things that, looking back, of course, everybody says hindsight's 20/20. And so looking back, there are some things that we could have definitely done different, but we were trying to get in the forefront of the digital industry, and no one else was doing that at the time. And so we were, in that aspect, possibly just a little bit ahead of that, but also knowing the success that we had with Jeff Fenholt on TV, we were also going to do some television things also. And it just, at the time, it was just changing so much that that somewhere in the in all of the mixture, I think we just kind of got lost in the mix there somewhere. And so if I would have, I don't know at that period if I would have done anything much different, because everything was either traditional radio or traditional television. We didn't have Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and all of the Twitter and everything that we have now to promote. So we were kind of somewhere in between all of that.
I know that at one point around 2001 or so, the retail trade aspect of the record business changed dramatically. We've talked about it a lot on the podcast here in different episodes. Let's fast forward to 2008 when you had the label. There were some still big studios with a decent amount of recording budgets that were cranking out CDs. Do those days seem to be history now? I mean, Everyone with a laptop and a decent microphone can consider themselves a producer, and we're no longer selling large volumes of CDs or even downloads for that matter.
Yeah, you're right. You were a part of the industry in the retail side with a record company back then in 2001, 2002, and of course it's changed drastically since then. You're right. Back when we had our place, we owned our own studio, so we had a little bit more freedom there. We didn't have to pay the big studio prices that a lot of people were still getting back then. They were still getting somewhere between $1,500 and $2,000 a day just for the studio time. And of course, those days are past. That's no more as far as that aspect is concerned. It's still history. There are still a few great studios around, but they don't charge the great big prices that they used to because they just can't get it. It's not a demand anymore. And Music Row back then was filled with studios up and down 16th and 17th and even 18th Avenue. And as you know, it's just not that way anymore. It's filled with apartment buildings now. And there's still a few good places there, still a few good recording facilities there, but nothing like, I think I read at one time, there was like 250 recording studios, and we're talking the state-of-the-art facilities on Music Row, and now there's somewhere around 10, and so it's just greatly changed. And people were cranking out CDs and still making money off of CD sales at that point. And nowadays they're just not doing it. CD sales are not there, and so everybody is doing the biggest. I read a thing the other day where the biggest place where everybody from 15 to 40 is getting their music is their streaming. And so it's streaming online. The downloads are down. The CD sales are down. CDs will probably go away in just a few years, kind of like the 8-track and the cassettes did. And one thing that's kind of become a little more popular now are download cards, where you get a card. You can purchase a card for about the same amount of money that you do from iTunes on an album project. But you go there and you download whatever music that you've bought. You can download that from a website, and but yeah, streaming is about 40 or 50% now of the sales and the means by which people get their music out there. And if if you're a record label or you're an independent artist, and if you're not streaming music, you're just that far behind. So, and you're right. With everybody with a laptop and a decent microphone, they now consider themselves a producer. But I kind of look at that this way too. It kind of I own a great set of golf clubs, but they're sitting in my garage, and that doesn't make me be able to golf like Tiger Woods, or at least the way he used to. And so you still have to have some skill to produce a record. There has to be some music sense, and you have to know the right approach in order to do that.
What do you say to the young artist these days who comes to you and is seeking validation as to why they should hire a producer and work in a professional studio versus working out of someone's garage?
Yeah, if when a younger artist comes to me and sits down with me, the reason that they would need a producer is, I have kind of got adapted a saying that the old lawyers used to say, that he who represents himself in court has a fool for a lawyer. I kind of do the same thing with a producer. If you're not really a music producer, then you need someone who can lead you and guide you through the music process, because it's more than just arranging music. You may be able to write music and you may be able to arrange music, but do you know the right musicians to hire to put with that piece of music? Do you know the right studio to go get? And yeah, we still actually do need a studio to go and at least record good tracks in there. Now, you can go to smaller places or even at home if somebody has it set up at home and do decent vocals. Like you said, if they know how to produce a record and they've got a good mic pre, a good compressor, and a really good microphone, which
can be expensive any way you slice it.
Which that can range anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 in equipment right there. And so, but if they've got all of that, then yeah, you can still do a great you can do a great album mix as far as a vocal and all of that. But you still need to have a professional studio to cut those tracks in. And so, yeah, I would tell a young artist anywhere, don't try to do it at home on your laptop. Do it right if you're going to do it, because you won't really get recognized if you don't.
This is Bob Bender with our special guest Rick Lloyd here in the studio. We're going to take a short break. You're listening to the business side of music.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Hi, this is Bob Bender, president of Bob Bender Productions. Since 1987, our company has provided consultation and artist direction services for recording industry artists. If you're looking to take your music career to the next level, or simply need advice on jump-starting a project or marketing one that's been completed, then we're here to assist you with over 40 years of experience in the entertainment business. We offer individual or group sessions, in person, or over the phone or Skype consultations. Feel free to call our office at 661-326-1140 or email us at info@bobbenderproductions.com for more details.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Hi, we're back, the business side of music, with our special guest Rick Lloyd here in the studio. Hey, Rick, when you're producing, how do you approach the mixing and mastering process in the studio? In so many cases these days, the process seems to be trimmed down and compressed, at least compared to what we used to do when, we were back in the studio, more so in the analog days, I guess, than in the digital days. So the quality of the music is designed more for earbuds now over professional sounding speakers. How do you handle that?
Yeah, you're exactly right. So when I'm producing in the studio, really, I just produce in the studio. I've got my own studio mix room at my house, and that's the only place. That's the only time that I use my house. I don't do vocals and I don't do overdubs or anything at home. Studios have gotten price-wise, they've gotten decent enough now that you would have to spend a lot of money just doing that at home. You might as well just go ahead and do a good studio. I do my vocals and everything in the studio, and I don't approach the mastering while I'm in the studio and while I'm doing the tracking and the vocals. I do that totally separate. Once I get it home and I put it up on my screens, and everybody here uses Pro Tools, and so I use Pro Tools version 11, and I've got all the software needed to do great mixes and great mastering here. And so then I approach it then as to, we talk over with the client, okay, where's this going to go? Are we going to do a lot of Facebook? Are we going to do iTunes? Are we going to do all of these? So I do a couple of different mixes. I do one mix or one master especially just for the CD itself, and then I will do another one that's geared, like you said, toward the earbuds and toward a lot of people like Beats phones and Bose phones and all that. So I kind of approach that with that in mind, and I don't over compress. Everybody wants it loud. There's among engineers, they call it the loudness wars. And so I try not to get into that loudness war. And even if a client says, "Oh, I want it punchy and I want it loud," well, that's great. But there's a thing. I bought an album of a major artist the other day, and I was listening, and this artist is one of my favorite singers, and I was listening, and I was really disappointed because it was so compressed that the life of the music and even the vocal, the life had just gone completely out of it. And so I just don't like to approach it that way because by the time I go to iTunes or by the time I go to Spotify or whatever, it's going to be compressed a lot anyway. So I try in the mastering process, of course, to get great levels and to get even levels, and you got to compress some, but I don't hit it really, really hard like a lot of guys do.
So back in the day when I was producing in the studio, we used to mix and listen to music through several different reference speakers. We jumped from Mackie HR824s to the Yamaha HS8s, all the way down to the Ortone 5s, just to get a good starting point, a good reference point. In some cases, we'd even go outside to the car and pop the CD into the car stereo just to get a different perspective. Does it make sense to even get that detailed anymore?
Yeah, actually, I think it does, or at least in my world, I listen to it on several. I listen to mixes on several different things. I will listen. I use a set of tannoys to do basic, most of my basic mixing, and then I also use a pair of headphones. I will use headphones to get detailed with my mixes, and then I'll take the headphones off, listen back to those. Still have a set of Yamaha NS10s that I'll reference on. I still have a set of Oratones that I will reference on. So yeah, I will reference through it, because if it doesn't sound good everywhere, then it doesn't sound good. And as we said earlier, the majority of the people are either listening online or listening off of their iTunes. So I will do an iTunes master before I finish and put it into my iTunes and set with my earbuds and listen through the whole thing and just to see if everything translates okay. Because sometimes, some of the high end, some of the low end goes away. And of course, headphones now are built to compensate the low end, so you really can't tell it. But if you lose the sparkle of the cymbals and you lose the sparkle of that acoustic guitar, especially on a country record or a gospel record, then you got to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, I need to do something else in this particular master. So yeah, I do. To me, it does make sense to get that detailed, and because when it goes out there with my name on it, I want to be proud of it, and I know that the artist wants to be proud of it too.
So let me ask you this question. Where do you see the future of the recording studios going? I mean, there used to be some amazing facilities all along Music Row, just as there were in Los Angeles, like Sound City and New York's famed record plant. Those have all seemed to have gone away now. The business has become very competitive, and the cost of operating a fully loaded studio with a state-of-the-art console and all of the gear that goes along with it has become very expensive. A cost factor that obviously has to be handed down to the client. Do you think the traditional recording studio can survive in this world of plug-and-play recording?
Well, the future of recording studios, man, I don't know. I wish I had that crystal ball. I think that there's always a need for the studios, and you're right. There were some amazing facilities on Music Row and around the Nashville area that are now gone away, and Los Angeles, and as you said, New York's record plant. And I saw the other day where the Hit Factory may be going away, and boy, that just if anything saddens me in the music business, that's one of the things that really, really does. And so like you said, it's become so competitive that people, when you say, okay, my studio is $2,000 a day, like these guys were, or maybe even still are. And what happened a few years ago, when the record business was so good and all the budgets were $250,000 just to do the record itself, all of these great studios went out and they went to the record companies and said, okay, how much can I count on you for this year? So they would go to the bank and they would borrow $2 million to upgrade their facility. Well, right in the middle of all of that, unfortunately, all of the digital world came to us, and all of the recording studios started getting less and less busy. Here in Nashville, I know all of the demo business used to be done just for songwriters and things. They all had a budget from their publishers they could go in the studio whenever they wanted to, and they could spend a good amount of money doing demos. And nowadays, all of those demos are done at home. They're not, very, very rarely are pretty good demos done in studios anymore. And the record companies have just kind of come to expect that and accept it. So unfortunately, all that business went away, and with if you get a fully loaded state-of-the-art console, you're going to spend at least $500,000 on the console, unless you buy one used. And then when you buy one used, you've usually got to go in and recap it. And when I say recap, they all have capacitors in there. And so if you've got 50 or 60 channels, each channel has usually got 5 or 6 capacitors. So you see how long that takes just to get all that done. So that could be days worth of work, and very expensive. So yeah, it's pretty expensive nowadays. And the business has come so competitive that people are just saying, well, it's just not worth it for me to do that. And basically, we're left with only large investors and larger companies now that own the state-of-the-art facilities.
This is Bob Bender with our special guest, Rick Lloyd, and you're listening to The Business Side of Music.
You're listening to the business side of music.
This is Donna Herrick from the band Herrick, and we're members of Reverb Nation. Hundreds of shows a year have created our unique sound that you can hear on the new album Cotton Fields. Go to Reverb Nation, listen and download now. This is Donna Herrick from the band Herrick, and we're members of Reverb Nation.
When I was a little bitty baby, my mama would rock me.
Lot of cotton.
You're listening to the business side of music.
This is Bob Bender. You're listening to The Business Side of Music, and we have in the studio this episode producer extraordinaire, as we like to call him, not to his face though, Rick Lloyd. Here's a question for you. The cost of the project, I mean, if you're going to work in a studio, it's obviously a higher overhead. Is that something you hand down to the client?
Yeah, the cost factor has to be handed down to the client, of course. And so, if I, as a producer, and someone comes to me and says, well, hey, I want to go to Ocean Way and record, if they want to pay that kind of money, then basically I got to hand that down to them. And in the end, it's just going to cost them a lot of money. And you always got to say, okay, how many pieces of product or how much product am I going to make off of this? Is it worth my investment to go do this? So that's always a factor. It all comes down to money in the end. It comes down to how much am I going to spend? How much am I going to make off that? I mean, you can't buy Coca-Cola for 50 cents and go and sell it for a quarter. It just doesn't happen that way. And the traditional recording studio, I'm not sure how well it can survive in this world anymore. I think there again, going back to what I said earlier, it has to have a large investment, and that investor or investors or companies or whatever that invest in these studios, they have to have some deep pockets, and they have to wait for a good while for that money to return if you're going to own a large state-of-the-art facility nowadays.
Some years ago, you and I got to work with John Downs when he was developing a new microphone that seemed to have the same parameters of a Neumann U87. From what I remember, it was an amazing microphone, but it didn't seem to gather traction in the studio scene in Nashville. Do you think there's room for such creators of amazing sound gear like this out there in the recording world?
Yeah, John Downs. I love John Downs and his microphones, which was called Big, B-I-G. He had a microphone called Big, and then he had one called Big ER, so big and bigger. And the Big was basically had the same parameters as a Neumann U87. and the ER was more like a U47 or a U67, the old tube mics, and they sound awesome. I still have one, and they sound really, really great, really nice, and really warm. And I think that the reason that they didn't really get as much traction as they needed to, everybody loved them. Everybody that tried them out said, "Oh yeah, man, this is great." But the big deal was he couldn't compete. The small guy, it's hard. It's like a mom and pop operation versus a large corporation. It's just hard to compete with that and in a sustainable way. You might be able to sell some microphones for a while, which John did, but he wasn't able to sustain it because it cost him so much to build that microphone with the quality that they built. He had to sell it at such a high price that everybody says, "Oh, well, I can go buy a U87 for that, or I can go buy one sometimes used even a little cheaper." And so I think that that's the problem right there. And until these guys can figure out how to bring the price down, and probably, to be honest with you, the only way to bring that price down is to make a lesser quality product. There's a couple of companies now who are actually making pretty good microphones, copies kind of the U87 and the AKG 414s, and they're actually good quality. They're made overseas, and they're made cheaper, and so they sell their product at a cheaper price. And so that's the only way that smaller companies are going to compete, is to do it like that.
Of all of your clients, who was the most favorite to work with? I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but you must have one or two that stands out above the rest.
Oh, boy. Oh, yeah, you are putting me on the spot with this, because someone's going to hear this and they may get mad at me. I don't know. I don't want anybody to get mad at me, but I've worked with so many great clients over the years, and a lot of people that you wouldn't even know, and it was, they were just great. But of course, Jeff Fenholt was great to work with. He and I became kind of like brothers, and we really enjoyed each other. And the time that we spent in the studio, it was we just clicked. It is just one of those things. From the time he walked in the studio and we started recording, we just kind of clicked. And so that, and of course, the success that we had with the first album, the next two projects, I did two more projects on him after that sold somewhere in the vicinity of 400,000, just under the gold record mark, at 500,000. So we really had fun doing that. And of course, Tommy Cash was just a pleasure to work with. He became a great friend, and he just he lives not too far from where I live now, and he's just a great guy, and was just very humble and very easy. He took production directions so well. And which a lot of clients don't. A lot of artists don't take that direction as well as others. But Tommy was really, really great. And T. Graham is just he's kind of one of those guys that when it comes to his vocals, he doesn't need producing. You just put him in the studio and you just kind of let him do whatever he does. He just does the T. Graham thing, and it's just awesome. So I don't know that I can pick. I don't know that I can fairly pick a very favorite because they have all. I love all my artists. I have had some that I've said, well, hope I don't ever work with them again. And I think you and me and everybody else that's ever produced a record, we've all done that. So yeah. But it's hard to just pick one, and so I love them all.
Is there any one artist that you wish you had worked with but never had the opportunity?
Yeah, probably. If I had to pick one artist that I never got to work with, it would be Glenn Campbell. I would have loved to spend time with Glenn in the studio because he was such an innovative artist. He was a great musician. Of course, I'm a guitar player, and he's a guitar player, and he played so well, and so many people don't realize that Glenn was a great session player and a very in-demand recording session player in L.A. before he ever became a star. And he played on some of those huge records like the Beach Boys and things like that there wasn't didn't have album credits for musicians and stuff back then. But he was just so great and just so innovative. And then when he came along and started singing and being an artist, he had that really nice, smooth voice, but he had those inflections in his voice that you can't teach. There's just things with a voice and with guitar that you don't teach. It's either there or it's not. And with Glenn, I guess if anybody could say he had the it factor, Glenn had the it factor. And so I really, really wish that I would have gotten the opportunity to work with him. When I was with Billie Jo Spears, we did work some shows where he was at, so what we used to call package shows back then, where there would be several people and on the show, and we did work shows with him, and he was just, I did get to watch him from the side of the stage a couple of times, but boy, to be in the recording studio with him and to just watch him work, that would have, to me, that would have been the berries.
So what's next for Rick Lloyd?
Well, what's next for Rick Lloyd? That's a good question. You know, I've been doing this for 41 years now, and I never want to retire. You know, my mom always told me, pick something that you really enjoy doing, and you'll never have to go to work a day in your life. And that's kind of how I felt for the last 40 years. It's just been a joy to do this, and so I'll keep on doing what I'm doing. I actually mix a TV program for an evangelist that's worldwide on television. I do his weekly mix for him, and I'm also Rob Tripp here in Nashville has started a new record label, and it's called Fireplace Music. And with that, he's asked me to be a part of the team. And so I have been doing a lot of engineering and mixing and mastering and stuff for him. And I will also be a part of doing a lot of the publicity for the artist that he has. It's a Christian label, and so I'll be very, very busy with all of that. And I'm starting actually to go and do some media events where I'm actually speaking about live sound and live media, and especially for mega churches and things like that. I've got a curriculum called How to Spend $1 Million and Still Have Bad Sound. And so we're starting to do some of that. So at this point, everything, is, thank God and knock on wood, everything is very, very busy. And I'm working 6 days a week, and sometimes even 7. Last week, I actually worked about 9 days in a row before I got a day off, and I'm not complaining because it took me 40 years to get here.
I don't know if this is a fair question. I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer. But compared to where the recording studios are today, where do you see the future of them 5 or 10 years down the line? Is there still going to be a place for them? I mean, it is a very expensive, it's a very costly business.
Well, where do I see studios in the next 5 or 10 years? Hopefully still going strong. I think there's always going to be a need for the studio. Anytime anybody's recording, I don't care if you have a studio in your home, if it's well built and well equipped, that's great. And I know several artists have them like that, and I know that Vince Gill has one here, and several people have them, and that's great. They can do a full-blown recording session with all the musicians, and that's awesome. And but we're always going to need good studios to cut good music at. I still like to record all of the musicians at one time. I don't like one piece at a time. I think it takes away from the creativity. And there's nothing like having 5, 6, 7, 8 musicians in the room at one time, and you have all of those creative juices flowing. Somebody says, "Hey, why don't we play this?" And another one says, "Oh, well, let's do this." And it really makes music come together rather than sounding programmed. It just really makes it all feel human, and it makes it all feel great. So I think there's still going to be a need for that, but the day of the home studios are here. As a matter of fact, if I want to, with Pro Tools, we have file sharing capabilities now. So if I decide that, hey, I need this particular guitar lick by this guy that I know over in England, I can just share the file with him. He can overdub the guitar and send it right back to me, and I've got a guitar player sitting in England that has just done an overdub for me while I'm sitting here in Nashville. And so that technology is great. I love the technology of today, and I love spending time with the technology. So, we have that aspect of it. So I think that studios are still going to be viable, but what we do at home also is going to be a big part of the recording industry in years to come.
Rick, thanks for being in the studio today. You've given us a wealth of information and a great in-depth look on where the recording business has been and where it's going to go in the future. Let's do this again real soon.
Well, thanks, Bob, for having me. I appreciate it. It's always good to see you, and I appreciate you having me on the show.
Thanks, Rick. It's always a pleasure to get together with you. This is Bob Bender, and you've been listening to this edition of The Business Side of Music.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Tracy Snow and is produced by Bob Bender for Bob Bender Productions. Co-producer for the show is Vinny Rebus. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Los Angeles, California and Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound design by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Busan.